Justin Starling here. Thank you so much for joining today. I've got a great friend of mine, Dr. Nick, on here with me today. But real quick, before we jump into it, we're going to talk real quick about personal development. That market itself, the personal growth and development market, values today at around $38 billion and expected as to grow for the next 6-7 years at a 5% CAGR. So this market is growing. Everybody knows all those things are out there, and everybody's looking to try to get one step better, that 1% better every day. Dr. Nick here, I'll let him kind of talk and introduce himself, but I want to brag on him real quick. He's been on TV, he's written white papers, he works with these collegiate, professional, Olympians. He is a sports and performance coach, but he also works in the business world, working with companies in the Fortune 200, working with C-level executives, leaders, managers, mentors, and coaches and everything along the way. And let's talk about some great things that you're doing, Dr. Nick. Dr. Nick, thanks for coming on, and introduce yourself. Thanks.
Dustin, thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to having our discussion today. I appreciate your kind of explaining a little bit about my background. As a licensed psychologist, my training is very different than people that don't have that title. There are coaches and counselors, and there's nothing wrong with explaining that. But, the rigor of going through a doctoral program, writing a dissertation, and anything that I say, has to be able to be proven, either by data, research, or theoretical process, experiences, and supervision. So it's a very different kind of way of coming into this whole area around personal growth and development.
Right. No, I think that's great because, like you said, there is a lot of other companies out there and a lot of different organizations who do the data-driven. We spoke before this. I've done some previous tests. They put me in a certain quadrant. I'm a certain color. Right. I've got these 4 little identifiers. And while those do give you value, I guess what separates you and what you do from those other organizations?
It's a great question. The assessment that we use is called the test of attentional and interpersonal style. Now, most people are not familiar with this. And the reason for that is that you cannot just take the test and then get a report back. In order to receive the data, you have to be debriefed by someone who's been trained. And in my consultancy, I lead the charge in terms of doing the debriefings, but provide information, very data-driven information. And we're looking at 3 basic areas. We're looking at your attentional style. So, for example, you will shift your attention from one thing to another without even moving your vision. You can become aware of things around you. The other thing we look at are intra-psychic processes and interpersonal aspects. So it is a psychological test, but it's not a personality one. And we don't use colors or letters.
Gotcha. No, I think that's great, because I know when we, because I have taken the test for everybody out there, and, it was quite eye-opening. I took the test, and we were going through, and then I think the most impactful thing wasn't so much the data and seeing myself on scales and where I kind of fit in, but the most impactful part of the whole process was actually sitting back down with you and then going through and really, I think uncovered some things about me that I think I knew, some things I admit, and some things that, okay, great, that I knew that. And so I really enjoyed that part of it where you're actually able to extract things about, hey, here's where, you explain me to a T, and here's how we improve these measures. So I do appreciate it. And I guess how do you go about kind of coaching and kind of bringing out that data with the people you work with?
A great question, Dustin. When we went through that, I helped you understand that we were going to look at your decision-making process. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at basic things about what's called your attentional style and factors that, either exacerbate, the conditions that might interfere, such as distractions or anxiety. And then it also identifies attributes that are very high-level performance. So one of your highest attributes is what people would refer to as grit. And grit is more than just passion and perseverance. The most important aspect of grit to me is self-reliance and the low need for positive reinforcement. Now, knowing your background as a military man, and thank you for your service, of course,
appreciate it.
That in that process of having grit and persevering And having passion, it's not enough. You don't get positive reinforcement for what you do in a service. You just do it because that's your responsibility. So we look to predict high-level performers in industry or in sports, any aspect of life. We're always looking to evaluate that portion. That's part of what we do in our assessment. You have a very high-level grit component. This is also a factor in what we've described as self-reliance, which means that you don't need other people to tell you that you're doing a good job. It comes from within you.
Right.
This is a lot different than confidence. People confuse confidence as the best predictor of performance. But if we could address that for a moment, if you don't mind.
Sure,
If you look at the factors in confidence, the definition includes two basic processes: a belief about your ability to perform or your feelings about your ability to perform. But now, if we look at beliefs, they don't always tell us the truth, do they? Right? People go to war, die, and kill other people based upon what they believe. And feelings clearly don't tell us the truth. I'm sure we've all felt that we could trust people and found out that really wasn't the case. Well, if inherent in the definition of confidence is belief and feelings, how can we possibly use that as the best predictor of performance? Now, the other attribute about confidence is that if low confidence produces low performance and high confidence produces high performance, how do you get from low confidence to high performance? Mm-hmm. And people will say, increase your confidence. Well, it doesn't work like that. So that's why we stay away from. But with the things we're using with your what's called efficacy, which is the truth about your ability. Like when you use, if you use a medication, ibuprofen, something along those lines, you could take it on a Monday afternoon or a Sunday morning, or if you're in Afghanistan or if you're in the U.S., it won't matter when you take it, because the truth is the efficacy of it is that it always does what it says. Wouldn't that be great if we looked at self-efficacy? What's the truth about Dustin? Or what's the truth about the people that I'm working with? And that's what we spend a lot of time looking at, or the processes that they're using in decision-making.
That's great. I love that. There's a quote by Jocko Willink, extreme ownership. And, and it's essentially what he says is, I'm probably going to destroy it, so I apologize, Jocko, but like we're good friends. But yeah, I know. And what he says in there is, it's, motivation is not enough. It won't get you through. It's discipline that does. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're saying about as far as,
yes,
who you really are, your authentic person. And and also I love that point you made about the confidence piece, well, do better. Like
right.
That doesn't always work,
No,
try harder,
it doesn't. It doesn't.
And so, I think one of the things that, again, going back to how you work with, whether it's athletes or executives, I know you're big in the golf world and all kind of stuff. You've been on, I think, a golf channel, which I don't want to name by name because I'll get, trademarked. But yeah, I mean, so, when you're working with these professionals and these, there are professional athletes and professional, executives and leaders. I mean, how do you kind of coach them through, whether it's a bad golf game, a bad round, a bad hole, or, a bad quarterly report? I mean, how do you coach them through that part and have them focus on what really helps them along?
It's a simple concept, and that is a focus on the truth. We don't focus on what a person's thinking. We don't focus on what they're believing. We focus on the truth. So here's a simple example. So this was actually a high school athlete, and she was a high jumper. And in her junior year, she jumped 5'4". In her senior year, she was jumping 5'2". I saw her one day before the counties, and she had to jump 5'5" to get into the nationals. And she came to me, and I said, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Well, my coach said I need to work on confidence." I said, "Well, we're not doing that one." Yeah. So I said, show me your video. And she showed me her video, a very long-legged, attractive, athletic female. And she showed me when she was jumping over the bar, her butt dropped and she knocked the bar off. But now at the same time that was happening, she was picking her head up. And I said, "Oh, can you keep your head flat?" She said, "Yes. Keep your head flat tomorrow." So for the next 45 minutes, I gave her imagery techniques and breathing techniques and how to get focused on just identifying that aspect of her performance. Next day, she jumps 5'6", and she jumped for a Division I university, kind of as a result of what she did that day. But so it's a good example. We don't look at what you feel or believe. We look at what the truth is.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's great, and I think, looking at the truth, and I know that there are a lot of things out there, probably a touchy subject, but, all the 20-year-old, life coaches out there and everything, I think a lot of times it's, what's your truth and what's that kind of thing. But I feel like kind of going back to how you differentiate yourself, and that is through
Right.
science and through data.
Right.
And I feel like, having gone through a lot of coaching events and personality, personal growth type things, a lot of times they focus on, well, how does it make you feel, and how does it make you feel, and how's that kind of thing. But
Right.
if it makes you feel good but doesn't result in anything, then really it's kind of pointless. So going back to the data that you pulled for me personally, I know that one of the things that you mentioned was kind of like, it's not so much my risk aversion, but more so that I look at things, and probably from my time of flying helicopters and airplanes in the Army, I can look at things very quickly. Here's the risk. Here's how to mitigate it. Let's move forward. But I think what that's done for me, and you pulled this out, was it's maybe hindered me at my professional growth and my personal growth, because I'm always mitigating risk and not willing to take those additional risks. Do you see that a lot today in either athletics and or in the business world?
Yes, I do. I think that when we look at what I would describe as the DNA of leadership, and we look at 4 different attributes, and certainly we can get into that. One of the factors I always look for to see if there's a biasing in the analysis is whether or not a person has a predisposition to becoming anxious. Now, people don't know this, but there are 6 different forms of anxiety. I won't bore you with all the specifics about that. But one of the things that's interesting about people that are anxious is that they're actually very creative. A problem with the creativity is if you're negatively thinking, if you have low confidence, or if you believe in that and you're paying attention to your feelings, then you're going to buy into, if I'm not feeling good about this, I'm not going to do well. So that's why we move your attention away from what you're feeling to what the truth is. So in the example of the high jumper, she was frightened that she wasn't going to do well. And when I shifted her attention away from what she was feeling to what she could actually do, what the truth was, she could just hold her head back. So the whole thing around risk taking is, as you know, you take a risk if you don't take a risk, you take a risk if you do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't take a risk, you don't discover. And if you do take a risk, you're going to discover what might not work. Tell me what's better. Now, we're talking about reasonable risks, not unreasonable ones.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at your profile and see that you were kind of low in risk taking, that's kind of a generalized statement. Can you develop greater risk taking? Absolutely. You're very, very high in awareness. You don't miss a piece of data. You're very, very high in analysis. You do very well with that as well. And you're very high in being able to focus and shift your attention in a heartbeat. All we have to do is teach you how to shift your attention to where it needs to be. And I think that you would see that your risk taking would actually change. So you can take a look at any object in your office right now. Anybody who's listening, just kind of stare above the computer screen, straight ahead. And now, without moving your eyes, become aware of something to the right of you and become aware of something to the left of you. Now, you haven't changed your vision, but your awareness has increased. So all of our work is about increasing your awareness and shifting your attention to what the truth is. Not what you believe the truth to be, but what the actual truth is. So I would agree with you. There are subjective truths, but then there are actual truths. And that's a lot of what we do. The integration of, philosophy in my work, as well as science of psychology and social psychology and, analytics, kind of blends together in a very, very unique way.
Right. Actually, I was doing that exercise while you were talking through it. I was like, I got a jacket over here. Here's a picture of my kids.
Right, without moving your eyes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, we lived in when I was in the Army. I lived in Savannah, Georgia, for a couple of years, and my wife would love doing the carriage rides. You jump on the horse and you go around. You get a historical view of Savannah. And I remember they always had the blinders on, and it really helped focus the horses on what's right in front of them.
That's
because
right.
they had somebody back behind them driving them where to go.
Right.
And I think sometimes we can't do that in business. I mean, yeah, there are times to just kind of put the blinders on and just kind of head down
Sure.
and focus on what's in front of you. But I think today, in today's environment, working from home, I'm in my basement, been here for the past year, it feels like. But it's one of those things where there's so much going on. There's so many changes in the world today that you have to be able to keep focused right ahead, but also know what's around you to the side and how to kind of go around that.
Perfect. And, so what we would describe as reasonable distractibility. So all effective leaders have reasonable distractibility. If you're driving down the road, and I know that you live in New Jersey now, so, in the area that you live in, there's some wildlife, right? So there's some deer running, around. Now, you don't necessarily go out and say, I better be watching for a deer today. You get in your car, and as you start driving, if a deer comes up, you don't tell yourself, oh, that's a deer. You automatically respond to it. Your subconscious mind is actually driving the car, and your subconscious mind is picking up data that you need. So high-level performers understand how to gather the information in the process, which eventually turns into what's called intuition. You don't have to think about this, and you don't even know how you got there. But that's the process that we also look at is, intuition and part of decision making. So we look at creativity and intuition and leadership, which is a little bit different than what you might find in some of the other scores.
Right. Now, what about, and kind of going back to one of your initial points was, you're kind of going around and working with business leaders and so forth. And that is around the idea of being able to help not just individuals, but help teams and help business grow. I'm looking at reports, all the time with
Right.
The war on talent right now is really big.
Right.
And so is what you do, is it really geared towards individuals, or is it geared towards organizations and corporations, whether it's a 3-person business and or thousands of people across many countries? Like, what does this work best for?
The answer is yes. So we work with individuals and we work with groups. One of the companies that we're working with now with the leadership, obviously, there's very significant leadership, 43 presidents in a company and 12,000 employees, in the nation. So we're working sort of like from the top down. We work with a smaller company that's 200 employees, and we've evaluated every one in their company. And so what we do is we can identify the qualities of the leadership. So like when we do succession planning, we select the high performers based upon whatever the corporation is saying. We get that data. And then when we're looking at individuals that are coming up for the next level, we compare their performance from a cognitive process, mental, the things I've identified, and see what attributes those individuals have. Then we go in, we actually train, the next generation up. We don't want to, it's not about letting people go, right? Your people are your most important asset. So we can do, we certainly work with smaller companies, but all the way up to global companies, a couple 100,000 people, with leadership. And then we can move and find, data points for different aspects of different parts of the programs, so whether, it's private equity or if it's management of other attributes of finances, manufacturing, whether we're looking at service or investments, we have data points for each one of those leadership responsibilities, which I don't think you're going to find in any other kind of program.
Yeah, I think one thing that we had talked about earlier was the empathy piece.
Right.
And I think a lot of that comes back to when we hear empathy. I automatically think that it is, okay, I'm having a bad day. Dr. Nick, tell me about your day, and I'm here to kind of support you.
Thank you.
But yeah, keep going. I'm here. I think that's a word that is thrown around, but not really talked about in what it could really be. And when you just answered that last question, and that was, you really help organizations kind of grow, not just the top layer, the top C-level, but the leaders that come up. So how do you kind of work with that piece there, as far as, number one, identifying what to work on, but how to work with the people within the organization? How does that part work of that?
Well, so when you look at what an empathic process is, most people automatically start talking about emotions. Oh, I feel whatever it is for you. And then they start sharing, so you understand that they really have a very similar experience emotionally. When we're looking at leadership, wouldn't you agree that having a sense of belonging is an important part of the function of leadership?
Absolutely, yeah.
I would assume in a service, because of the camaraderie, and this isn't gender specific, right? In your camaraderie with other personnel, whether they're leaders or subordinates below you in terms of your leadership, what you need is a bonding portion of that taking place. Now, one of the reasons why that takes place is because there is a mutual understanding because of very similar experiences. Now we're not talking about emotions, but we are talking about how you make decisions. So part of what we do in a company is go in and we're evaluating whatever the personnel group is that they want us to, and we now try to help the leaders understand their subordinates. How's that? Versus, the subordinates try to understand their leaders. But we want them to understand how they're making decisions, how they're actually experiencing phenomena, how they actually communicate. So in the process of empathy here, we're moving not necessarily away from emotions, in addition to that. Now, this is based upon the phenomenon that the only way to have a sense of belonging is through understanding. There's a great book called Understanding, a Necessary Ingredient in Human Belonging. So when you feel understood, when you were certainly in the military, that made a big difference, I think, because you then could anticipate anyone who's working with you in flying your helicopters. They understood what you understood, and that allowed them to make decisions that they knew you were going to be making as well. Mm-hmm. Why aren't we doing that in leadership and business? And so the empathy thing is, although it's described as a really important value system, particularly in leadership in, our century, but we're looking at, in our work, we're looking at understanding that goes way beyond what's occurring emotionally. It is about decision-making processes, the experience of leadership, and making sure that gets used. Now, because of the whole pandemic, and I've done a number of presentations for companies, as a community service about this, the only way you're going to belong is if you feel understood. And when belonging occurs, your immunological system actually becomes stronger.
I think there's a lot to unpack there.
It's a tremendous amount.
I think like I said, going back to that sense of belonging, and I think that's been one of the tough really pieces for me personally, anyways, about this whole shelter in place, the quarantine, the lockdown. I mean, whatever buzzword we're using today. I think that's been for me, anyways, that one of the toughest pieces, because I really enjoyed going to the office, not so much for being able to kind of coffee chat and that kind of stuff, but really just because it was a very tangible aspect of belong to something. Like I said, when I was in the military, I wore a uniform, and every day when I put that uniform on, I was now no longer Dustin. I was a member of something bigger. And I find that that's really one of those tough pieces for me personally, again, that has been really had a kind of a struggle through this thing was, yes, I work for a great company, and yes, I've got a great family here, and I really enjoy being home. At the same token, like there's that sense of belonging that kind of gets eroded away over time. I mean, how are you, especially like with the elite performers that you work with? I mean, what's their characteristics? Not just getting through the times now, but in general, how are they, getting through tough times, and also how are they performing at such a high level?
Well, you're talking about the process of what's called identity, and so you identify yourself as military personnel leadership in your organization, and it's your being is in the context of what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So we're human beings. We focus mostly on what we're as human doings. So the problem is that if we're not doing what we've been doing in the past the same way, albeit, meeting up with people, at the water cooler or having a cup of coffee or something along those lines, if you're not doing the same things, now we have the essential process of making sure we are understanding our human being. Now, this becomes very philosophical, and I can explain it further, but we've not been set up to do that. We've been set up to be in a context. Humans do not do well on their own. A human infant is the most helpless infant of all species in the world. I think, except maybe for a whale, can't survive on its own. But there's a documentary where a lion actually brought a goat, around and actually nurtured the goat. But we don't do well by ourselves. So what's essential here is now trying to have a sense of belonging, but we have to do it in a different way. Now, individuals who do well here, you can go back to the grit process. You can go back to the disclosure. I really want to make sure that Dustin is understanding me, so I'm going to try to meet him about things that, are meaningful for him, but unless I understand that, I can't do that. Can you actually bond over the internet? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. You know, as a clinician, the research is now that we can do therapy via video because all the reports say the same thing. We can establish an empathic relationship with someone. Now, I don't think we're taught to do that. I don't think we were prepared to do that. It certainly isn't the same thing as the kind of belonging that you have in a camaraderie when everybody's present at the same time. All groups have a personality. So that's what I'm working on. Now, part of the problem that I have is that some teams aren't meeting now. So, for example, all the Ivies are not in competition. So I'm working with athletes. They are both individual and team athletes, and we still have to try to help them understand this whole process, of fostering that sense of belonging, talking to coaches and players as well. So we have to instruct them on how to do that effectively.
I think, like I said, I love that last point that you made, that you have to instruct them, because like you said, I don't think we were prepared for this. And you're going back to, your initial point of, as far as like the virtual telehealth and that kind of thing.
Right.
I was speaking with the CEO of a company that's what they do. And it's a fantastic company and they do great work. But, and kind of talking to him, one of the key points I came up with is, I think it was somewhere around like 65% of Americans anyways, actually almost prefer a virtual telehealth meeting versus going inpatient, going inside to the building. But again, we weren't ready for that. We're like I said, we're social beings, and we have to instruct people that this is now the new norm. And I now that I said that, I hate that term, but yeah, and I guess I think one of the things that you really brought out in my assessment was I'm good at multitasking. I'm good at doing these things. But the time where I would really lose focus is when when my focus would kind of deteriorate over time. It's almost like when I get bored. You know what I mean? Like when I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and just whether it's no success or no results, and or just a routine thing. How do you fight that in this environment?
Yeah. Well, first of all, part of the reason for being bored really is values based. In other words, if it doesn't really have that kind of purpose, like you've done risky things in your life, and every day when you were doing things, whether you were on assignment or you were training or leading, every day it was interactive and the environment was quickly changing. And that kind of feeds the process of your desire to multitask. Now, it is part of a desire. So when we look at that, aspect on the test, it is a preference. That's something that you have thrived for. Now, what else do you value? Well, you value your work, you value your responsibilities, and the grit is always going to carry you through. So I would say that under pressure, there's no doubt that you can keep your attention protracted. If the pressure is not there, I'm not so sure it's going to take place, partially because of the preference. So what we do is that when you have the opportunity to do this, is you limit the time on task. The human span of concentration is only 10 minutes. So try to go 10 minutes without something coming into your mind. Even during this interview, other things are running through my mind. In spite of the fact of my age, I'm still able to remain focused for some periods of time and, keep myself away from that. But that goes back to the attentional shifting. So let's look at how you intend on doing things, which is going to drive your attention, which has a lot to do with what happens with distractions. Now, I'm sure you've read a paragraph, and after you've read it, you don't remember what you've read.
Right.
I said, Dustin, this is a new paragraph. I want you to find the two most important points. Would you read that paragraph differently?
Absolutely. Yep.
Isn't that interesting? So when the intention is present, it drives your attention. So if you are bored, your attention is being distracted because you're not intending to fight the boredom. You're intending to pay attention to things that are distracting you. And so when you're reading that paragraph and you don't remember what you've read, it's not a conscious intention, but nonetheless subconscious. You don't get up each day and say, should I honor my family and my friends? Should I be loyal? Because your subconscious intention drives you. Now, when you're bored, your subconscious intention is taking you away from that.
Right.
Just as you shifted your attention before, if we trained you to now have a new intention. I need to be focused for the next 3 minutes. I think you could probably do almost anything for 3 minutes, and that'll break the cycle of being distracted by things that are not relevant.
Yep. Actually, no, it's I get made fun of, but my I love Outlook. I love the calendar on there, and everything's color organized. I mean,
Right.
today yours is orange, because of reasons, and other
Right.
things are yellow and purple and blue, and they all have a purpose. And the other thing for me is like the reminders, for me, it drives me bonkers. Like when people put like a 15-minute, reminder, hey, there's a meeting coming in 15 minutes, because that just broke my stream of consciousness that I don't have to think about it for another 15 minutes, it's like, and so I think one thing, for me, like I said, the intention behind it,
Right.
there's a great book, Eat That Frog. And I read that years ago, and I just reread about 8 months ago or so, but there's a lot of great nuggets in there. And one of the things I pulled away was putting task and putting priority level on things. Here's my A level task. I don't move on to my B level tasks
Right.
until I get done with my A. And
Right.
my B ones are stuff I delegate out,
That's right.
And so I think, when I find myself being, I guess, less productive, I have to go back to that. And that was one of the things you kind of brought up was,
That's right.
our assessment was, focus on being intentional about where your attention is going to. So, yeah, I mean, I have things blocked off in 15-minute increments. I've got 30 minutes here, because that's how I thrive, and that's how I work best.
There's no doubt. And so you have the clear experience of what you're intending to do, and you kind of put those in different levels.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. If there's white space in my calendar, I don't know what to do, So I try to fill it with something, at least something productive, anyways. Yeah, I really do thank you so much for your time. I mean, of course, we can keep going on forever and ever, but yeah, I would just say, number one, thank you for what you've done for me personally. I know our good friend Kevin Restici, and I think I pronounced his name right, because I've heard it like 6 different ways. But I know you've made a huge impact on his life as well. And I think just our short time working together, man, I mean, like I said, you've uncovered so much just in my personal life. And then knowing how you work with such high caliber amount of people, I appreciate you coming down to my level and working with me. But yeah, thank you so much for everything. I really do thank you. Last question I got for you would just be, for those people, whether they're, like I said, I know you work with high school athletes, you work with collegiate, professional Olympians, I mean, high caliber executives. If they want to learn more about you and what you do and how to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, thank you, Dustin, for everything you've said. And we're both humans, so no one's better than anybody else. But I appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you. So you can reach me at my email, drnick@performanceinmind.com. My website is performanceinmind.com, and certainly you can find me on LinkedIn. In addition to my work with high-level performers, I also work with high school and athletes and amateur, weekend athletes, guys who are on a golf course want to perform at a higher level. So, it kind of crosses the board, and everybody gets the same information, no matter, whether they're Olympians or they're a high school athlete, they get all the same data.
Yeah. And all the same data really brings out a lot within themselves. It's quite phenomenal. And I highly recommend everybody reaching out. I will put all the links and all your emails and everything down
Thank you.
in the notes. But again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nick. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much.
I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to continuing our conversations, Dustin.
Of course. Thanks, Dr. Nick. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.